girl whose tongue kept exploding till it choked her and she died. There was another child whose brain kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. In Argentina, they spray Roundup, glyphosate. And I've seen images of children without brains, you know. The head ends here. Total rupture at the back. The whole body is, baby is born, all the insides are coming out. This is not normal. And the challenge for ecology today is to understand connections. But you can only understand connections when you look for them. If you shut out connections, how will you see them? And in complex phenomena, and all living systems are complex. Life, now scientists define living organisms and living systems as self-organized complexity. Ecosystems are self-organized complexity. The planet as a whole is self-organized complexity. And in that complexity, when things change, it is not, causation doesn't take place in that linear way of an action A will cause an consequence B. Now, an action A will create a context for processes B, C, D to either get reduced or aggravated. That is why I think it is time for us to stop being in denial of the fact that the pollution of the atmosphere is leading to climate instability. And it isn't even that we have to do guesswork about this. After all, 2,500 scientists have worked on this for 2.5 decades at a world level to understand, not in one discipline, but hundreds of disciplines, what's going on. And if you look at any of the models, and if you also look at the experience, our peninsula, the Indian peninsula, is the worst impacted. It already is. But if you project it, 3 things are happening now and will get aggravated. The first thing is, of course, that you are having global warming. You are having increase in temperatures. And glaciers are retreating. We did a study about 3 years ago on climate change in the Himalaya. And lots of glaciologists worked with us. We put together scientists from different disciplines, but also communities to do their own participatory assessment to say this glacier used to be 25 feet thick and now it is 2 inches. So we had the grassroots knowledge, we had scientist knowledge. And then something happened and glaciologists were told, don't say glaciers are shrinking. So we have their publications, and I said to one of them, but Dr. Kanju, your publication is printed in this book. And your data is showing on 5 glaciers you've studied that there's a retreat. It is, yeah, there's an overall retreat, but the nose has not shrunk. They find one little part that didn't recede, because the whole glacier doesn't recede at the same level. And this was related actually to a geopolitical issue, where before Copenhagen, the US government, driven by their fossil fuel industry, said, get the leading players of the world to come on board with you to get out of the legally binding climate change treaty, to come into voluntary commitments, and to start saying you can't survive without growth. But if the growth has an externality that's wiping out Uttarakhand one season, wiping out Jammu and Kashmir in the next season, wiped out Ladakh in 2010, 200 people were washed away in a desert. Ladakh is a high altitude desert. It doesn't get rain. In winter it gets some snow. They survive on the basis of glaciers giving them a little water. They had such heavy floods. In 2007 was the first time. And some villages were washed away. 2010, all of Leh Valley was washed away. Then too, the army is what helped them come back. Right now, Orissa is having floods. Last year they had Cyclone Phelan. So if you start putting all the disasters together, their frequency is increasing and their intensity is increasing. If there's a drought, it's a longer drought. If there's intense rain, it's far more intense than you got. It's also more concentrated, which is why seasonal averages don't work anymore. Because the 2 days of rain on 16th and 17th of June last year is what wiped out Uttarakhand. The average might not change. And normally we love to make averages. So the context for the climate has been changed through our polluting activity. And that's why the scientists talk about this phenomena as anthropogenic. That human beings causing it. They say 99.9% certainty because they've done all the modeling. If this additional pollution wasn't in the atmosphere, this is how temperatures would change. This is how oceans would warm. This is how trade wounds would change. And it's quite clearly way beyond the normal extrapolation of how variations of the climate in natural conditions take place. Now, I actually had given the theme of Beej Swaraj and Anna Swaraj, and if Kashmir wasn't happening, I wouldn't be talking about what's happening with these climate disasters. But if you come back to both Uttarakhand and Jammu and Kashmir, the second thing that's happened in both these places is reckless construction. Because our building, in Bombay better than any other city because it started from Bombay. There is a real estate mafia. There's so much money in real estate that grabbing any piece of land where there shouldn't be buildings, I know your mangroves are being chopped down to expand buildings. All of the floodplains of Kashmir have been built over. All. Now when you build everything up and you've got boundary walls, there is no way the natural drainage of a system will work. Delhi gets floods with half an inch rain because the drainage is all blocked. You remember, I think it was 2010, the Bombay floods? 2005, it's so long ago. But again, part of it was too much rain, part of it was no drainage. That combination. And that no drainage is because we forgot that simple teaching of the Isha Upanishad. This universe is for the benefit of all beings. And in our philosophy, a being is not just a human being. A river is a being. That's why we worship our rivers. Food is a being. I don't think any other culture has defined food as a being. Because food is the web of life. There's the other Upanishad, the Taittiriya Upanishad, which says everything is food, everything is something else's food. And then goes on to say the highest dharma is the growing and giving of food in abundance. And this is, in fact, connected to those floods we see in the mountains. How is it connected? I wrote a book before Copenhagen, and I gave the title Soil Not Oil. Soil Not Oil because all focus of the development since the coal-driven mechanization of England and then the finding of oil and gas has been based on fossil fuels. And this machinery of fossil fuels has the externality of pollution of the atmosphere and the destabilization. The biggest contributions to the three gases that are the atmospheric polluters, carbon dioxide, nitrogen oxide, and methane, come from industrial agriculture and globalized trade in agriculture. My assessment was 40%. And what I did was basically take the data of the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And they had not put agriculture as a sector. They'd put land use, they'd put transport, they'd put energy, and I did the percentages of each of these sectors to which agriculture, and industrial agriculture particularly, is contributing. So 40% of the greenhouse gases are coming from industrial agriculture. Nitrogen oxide is 300 times more lethal in climate damage than carbon dioxide. Methane is 20 times more damaging. Where does nitrogen oxide come from? Synthetic fertilizers. Same fertilizers that were made in explosive factories. The factories that made explosives for the war, those factories were converted into nitrogen fertilizer factories. There's an article yesterday, or maybe day before, about the Green Revolution. Now, Green Revolution was based on chemical fertilizers. And the reason it was pushed, we are told it was to save the world. And they're saying 2 billion lives saved in India. 1966, there weren't 2 billion people. And I was in school, I remember. The only thing that happened was, in the open market, the prices started to rise. But in the ration shops, they were regulated. And it was the prices rising because of a drought that had led India to ask for a little more wheat imports from the US. And we were told, no, we won't give you wheat till you bring chemicals. Take our chemicals. Norman Borlaug, who was the scientist behind this, he had worked in defense labs of DuPont before he was given this job of adapting plants to chemicals through dwarfing. There's an article about how he's a saint and how the Roman Catholic Church should canonize him, and his seeds were a miracle. Now, science is about understanding. It's about understanding the impact of those chemicals on the atmosphere, on the soil organisms, on waterways. On soil organisms, I met one of your group that has been to a village and found the soil organisms are dying. You just have to do an experiment. Take urea and sprinkle on an earthworm. It can't survive. The mycorrhizal fungi can't survive. Chemicals kill that which gives us real soil fertility. And yet we've created this illusion soil fertility comes from factories, not from the soil organisms that actually are producing. And the factory model of inputs is NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. The soils need every element, every trace element, every micronutrient. The only way they get it is when we recycle organic matter. So the plant has those nutrients, we give it back, and then the organisms increase. They multiply. So it's not Newton's first law of conservation, because it's a biological process. And therefore there's constant increase. Earthworms increase your availability of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, and in addition give you magnesium and calcium and other things, which that NPK cannot. And when the soils have those nutrients, your plants have those nutrients. When your plants have those nutrients, you have those nutrients. Basically, what has happened with agriculture is we've generated a hugely polluting system that is contributing to 40% of the atmospheric problem. It's contributing to 75% of the water problem. It's contributing 75% to biodiversity erosion and extinction. This is United Nations data. There are treaties around this. And it's contributing to 75% soil degradation. On the other hand, so food comes from soil, food comes from seed, food comes from water, food comes from the sun,